Dan McTeague was a Liberal MP for Pickering-Ajax and Pickering-Scarborough East from the mid-90s until 2011. Dan is now a businessman who runs Canadians for Affordable Energy, a company which supports Canada's energy sector. Today, we're not here to talk so much about oil and gas, but about how Dan barely recognizes the current Liberal Party of today compared to when he was a member of Parliament. Dan, how is the Trudeau Liberal Party different from when you served under former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien?
Well, the party I knew, grew up with, spent 38 years in, devoted half of that time as a member of Parliament and some of that on the front benches as a Privy Councillor, was really a balanced, moderate party, a party that had struggled with, obviously, with national unity, struggled with debts and deficits, struggled, of course, with ensuring that all representation in the country was honored. The previous time, of course, you saw no representation or very little representation out west. So an effort was made to ensure there was as much inclusiveness as possible. All of the ideas, no matter where they were from, across the regions and across the ideological spectrum, given the diversity of the country, was very well reflected in the governments of Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin, and even subsequent leaders after that, right up until, of course, 2011, when most Liberals were eliminated. But it is a very different party than the party that we knew, and certainly ones that I think many people assume still exist in so many ways, ideology, but most importantly, not so much, I think, a party that now is really founded on the issue of the cult of personality only.
So Dan, why do you think Justin Trudeau has moved so far to the left? The old Liberal Party was more of a centrist party, was it not?
It was. It was a very, big tent party. Everyone brought in ideas well respected, ideas shared, often debated. You won a few, you lost a few, but at the end of this, you still had a place there. Trudeau came in with two factors. One, the party recognizing that its lunch had been eaten by Jack Layton in 2011, and that it was either going to be a right or left situation. It gave, of course, Mr. Harper quite a bit of room to maneuver back to the center. The decision was made by Trudeau and his group that he would take over the far left. In fact, it wasn't lost on most that in the 2015 election, Mr. Trudeau was more NDP than the leader of the NDP at the time, Thomas Mulcair, in terms of deficits and spending and responsibility. That had been completely thrown out the door in favor of let's just do what we want, let's spend with abandon, let's bring in all sorts of wonderful ideas that'll re-energize the young vote, in particular pot legislation. A terrible thing to think about, that's really legislation that was the most important thing the government could bring forward. But that's really where I think things came off the rails. Then, of course, we see a government here that has no difficulty, no trepidation whatsoever in engaging in battles that are regional and causing frustration, the likes of which we haven't seen in 30 to 40 years.
Dan, many Canadians are concerned that the Trudeau Liberals are leading Canada towards a socialist government. Now, do you share that same concern? And if so, why?
I think so. And certainly the pandemic has permitted them to pretty much spend with abandon, to bring in ideas of a guaranteed annual income, but also, I think, to create a bit of a wedge so that if people have a traditional view, whether that be in terms of energy versus climate, whether that be religion, whether that be language, whether that be concerns about migration, all of these issues, which were once debated in a very healthy and open way, not just within the Liberal Party, but across the country, I've now seen a sort of divide and conquer of this sort of moral absolutism. And it really does fall into the category of it's either our way or there's no way. Very typical of the socialist dialogue, which of course goes along the lines of, if you don't agree with us, then you must be a terrible person, or using language that is condescending, that debases somebody simply because they bring forth a legitimate point, or they simply brand them as xenophobics, racists, the climate deniers, take your pick. These are things that Liberals would debate in the past, and debate from a position of respect and responsibility. They don't do that anymore. It's simply easy to label, pay some in the media $600 million a year, pay the CBC $1.6 billion a year, and you'll have a, if you will, a fifth column supporting this kind of nonsense. So the party hasn't just changed, it's also been able to change the narrative, and it's a very dangerous one because it risks not only damaging the unity of the country, but also I think the social fabric which has kept this country together over years.
My father used to say it's my way or the highway. It didn't work for me then, and it doesn't work for me now. Now, Dan, you must keep in contact with some of the current Liberal MPs. Are they also concerned with the direction that this government is headed?
Privately, they are, but many of them recognize that they wouldn't have been elected without the name Trudeau. The name Trudeau, for a lot of people, evokes this idea of strong Canadian government, independent view, experimenting with new policies, and sort of differing ourselves from those terrible American politicians and the way they do things down there. It's a little bit of contempt, and it's certainly not justified. It's for that reason I think many of us are concerned, and I think I have spoken to some former Liberal senators, some of my former colleagues as well. You won't hear them being involved at all. They're not going to take to the airwaves. They're not going to talk about these things. They're not going to talk about affordability, but they are very, very concerned. This is not in any way, shape, or form the same Liberal Party that we remembered just a decade ago.
So Dan, why have the various scandals which have rocked Justin Trudeau not really hurt him nationally in the polls? And I'm speaking, of course, of the We Charity scandal, SNC-Lavalin affair, the Aga Khan, and of course, remember the blackface controversy. Some call our Prime Minister the Teflon man because nothing really sticks to him.
Well, he makes deals. Let's be honest. The NDP is, for all intents and purposes, has now become an appendage of the Liberal Party. It doesn't exist other than to support the Liberal Party, and it may be big on bluster, but it doesn't have anything really to represent. The Liberals have stolen all their ideas. Now, that's not new. NDP ideas have been taken in the past, but not to the extent that NDP hasn't just had their policies taken. It's that NDP and Green policies have been completely outflanked. The Liberals are 5 steps ahead of them in terms of their radicalness. And at this point, because of the pandemic, the Liberals have been given probably a good year, but they now have a situation where there's no accountability. There's no one holding them to it. You see, for instance, today, the parliamentary budget officers saying, there is no accountability for what you have done. These should be setting off alarm bells. How are we going to pay a massive debt the size of which we've accumulated for all the reasons that we've said, and those things which we don't know about, the infrastructure spending? We can talk about the scandals about we and SNC-Lavalin. That's small stuff compared to the fact that there has been no rigorous accountability in the rules that have traditionally applied to spending to maintain our financial integrity in this country have now been completely thrown out the window. It's not just dangerous for the Liberals. It's very dangerous for every Canadian who pays a tax in this country and for the next generations to come. We're in very serious, deep trouble in this country financially, and that's likely to allow, well, parties like the Bloc Québécois to say the country's bankrupt and broke. Let's just move on. Let's do our own thing. So what you reap, you now sow, and I think the Liberals, particularly Trudeau, all of those things that he's done over the years are now starting to come to gather fruit for those who do want to see harm to this country.
You know, many in Alberta feel a real disconnect with Ottawa right now. What can the Liberals do to really bridge the gap with not just Albertans, but many of the prairie provinces?
Well, I'd say get rid of Mr. Trudeau, but I think you have to understand that the people behind him are the same ones that created division and rancor, for which we're still paying for here in Ontario with hydro rates. We just saw another increase on the weekend. The ideological underpinnings of the people around the Trudeau gang are highly elitist. They are highly deferential to their own group, and they're highly exclusive. And it's not, by the way, we talked a little bit about other things where there's exclusion. Age is also an issue with them. They don't like people who have experience, and they don't like people who can stand up and who can debate. It's one of the reasons why this Prime Minister is the first Liberal leader I've known who allows and encourages, in fact, brings in his own Prime Minister's staff to take notes on errant MPs who might say something bad about the Prime Minister. It's not just a Teflon Prime Minister, it's that this Prime Minister has no clothes. The Emperor literally walks around and is saluted everywhere he goes. He doesn't have a lot of opposition from the inside, and it doesn't seem like he has a lot of accountability from the media. Hopefully, perhaps there might be a Biden presidency, I don't know, but that allows some Canadian media to take its attention off our obsession with the US politics and Trump and start focusing on what have been the misdeeds of this Prime Minister, who by any account should not be the Prime Minister of this country, certainly if we want to maintain the financial and unity of this nation, which is badly fragmented because of Justin Trudeau's divisive policies. And it's not just language, it's not just regionalism, it's not just age, it's also his energy policies, which have been deliberately designed to destroy and to undermine Canada's most important economic engine, its oil and gas sector. I'm not here to preach for the oil and gas sector. I'm simply here to say that without it, I won't have a pension. My family physician won't have a job. Nurses and teachers will have a hard time making go. Social programs are on the line. You can't do away with the most important sector in this economy while spending through the roof as Justin Trudeau has done.
So why do you think the Trudeau Liberals are so dead set against Alberta's energy sector? I mean, doesn't the Prime Minister realize that there are billions of dollars sitting on the table with oil and gas that can contribute to our economy and help bring down that $1.3 trillion debt and maybe help get the budget under control during a pandemic?
Well, let's put the facts in perspective. If I were to get rid of the oil and gas sector tomorrow, how would I make up the 60 to 50 billion dollars a year in revenues it generates in economic activity? How would I maintain a Canadian dollar, which is reliant very much on our greatest exports and whose devaluation would mean massive inflation in Canada? And that doesn't just include the fact that 10 to 20% of your economy would be flat on its back. Most people would be out of work. And by the way, I'm from Ontario. I'd like to remind Ontarians that $161 billion in purchasing of financial assets, of insurance to banking to things like manufacturing. That's $40 billion a year in economic activity to my province in Ontario because of a healthy oil and gas sector. So if Canadians in my area, in my former riding, think that that's nothing to sneeze at and you can just walk away from it, go ahead. But if you're a nurse, you're a teacher, you're working for the public sector, you're depending on social safety nets, say goodbye to them, because what the Prime Minister has done in this country is undermine the most important, significant economic engine that we have, while at the same time creating an environment that makes it impossible for us to repay those debts. Now, of course, you can talk about modern monetary theory and all these wonderful, wacky left-wing ideas. You got to pay the piper sooner or later. We borrowed a lot of money. You got to kind of pay it back, and you can't pay it back if your economy isn't just not growing, it's actually stultifying. It's actually in free fall, which the Canadian economy is right now.
Dan, what can the Trudeau Liberals do to really strengthen our relationship with the United States? Many would argue that it's quite strained right now.
I'm not sure what can be done. I think the Prime Minister has to make a decision on Keystone XL. I think that's the first one, whoever the President of the United States is going to be, especially if it's President Biden, who isn't just about to take a steamroller to the entire energy sector of the United States. By the way, good luck with that. The Americans will get an experience of what we've been having up here for quite some time about what happens when you do that. But Keystone XL has to go through. The Americans need our oil. I want to make that really clear. Venezuela can't sell it. Iran can't sell it. Mexico can't sell heavy oil. Half of the U.S. refineries in the U.S. Gulf Coast and the U.S. PAD 2, which of course is the U.S. Central market, requires heavy Canadian oil in order to process. And they've made massive investments in upgrading those refineries. So if you don't have a Keystone XL, good luck with that, because Canada isn't just Canada that's going to suffer, it's actually Americans. And last time I checked, they still need diesel for transport. They still need diesel to run their armed forces, their tractors, and their mining. No one has that kind of heavy oil. And those who think it's just not important, or it's trivial, or it's dangerous, or whatever the case may be, are dreaming Technicolor.
What do you feel are the fundamental differences between Conservative leader Erin O'Toole and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau? Why, maybe in your opinion, potentially would O'Toole make a better Prime Minister than Mr. Trudeau?
Well, I know Erin very well. I know him. He was part of his area where he represents Durham was actually part of my old riding in Uxbridge. So we've had similar areas over different times. Distinguished himself radically from Justin Trudeau, not just on the financial side, but to find a way in which he can find a middle road. I think it's probably helpful. He's good friends with the Premier of Alberta. That's a good start. I would be concerned, though, and I have blogged about this, my concern about Mr. O'Toole, as I did with 2 or 3 other Conservative leadership contenders, and their adherence to the Paris Climate Agreement, which the Americans pulled out of officially last evening. The concern I have is that it imposes a very significant restriction on Canadians, does not give us credit for the natural gas and the clean energy that we've developed. It doesn't even use the proper date. We were a country that went to natural gas and made those conversions away from coal and other forms of fossil fuels before 2005. Now you're saying, well, you have to still get 30% less than 2005. Easy for our friends in the United States to do that. They did it after 2005. So, when the Prime Minister signed that little agreement, and we hear Mr. O'Toole and others saying, hey, maybe we should stick with it, I think we have to really understand what it's done. China's about to build 300 to 400 coal plants and increase in perhaps as little as 1 year, what Canada uses in about 2 to 3 weeks in terms of emissions. We have a solution. Let's get that natural gas over to them. But we don't get credit on the Paris Climate Agreement for that. I think if Mr. O'Toole were to demonstrate to folks like me that he's serious about being responsible, it would be to ensure that you don't stay on to an agreement that does so much fundamental damage to Canada's economic aspirations.
Former Liberal MP and now President for the Canadians for Affordable Energy, Dan McTeague, thanks for joining me today from Oakville, Ontario.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me, Al.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.